Hi, and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series where we cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Today's chapters are 2 Samuel 20 and 21, and we introduced to a troublemaker named Sheba, son of Bichri. He announces, as David's on his way back to Jerusalem, having defeated the armies of Israel who were following Absalom, he announces, every man to his tent, we want no part of David's kingship. Now, the men of Judah stayed faithful to David, but many in Israel began to follow this troublemaker. Well, anyway, when David gets back to Jerusalem, he has to contend with his concubines, girlfriends, if you like, who had been abused by Absalom. And this is a terrible picture. In fact, in both these chapters, of how the concubines were being treated in those days. Abused women, girlfriends who were not part of God's plan for one man marrying one woman for the rest of their lives. It was like this. But you can hardly blame them. I mean, it's like a patriarchal society that was just satisfying themselves. Anyway, these women are looked after, but they're taken out of the family of David, as it were. Now, David summons a general called Amasa, but he's late. And so David says, well, if you're not going to arrive on time, I'm going to give it to somebody else. He says to Abishai, go sort out Sheba, son of Bichri, because if you don't, he's going to be more trouble than Absalom was. Anyway, Amasa joins the troops, and Abishai's brother, Joab, puts a dagger inside him, and I don't know what sin he had committed. I mean, but we do see that these two brothers, Abishai and Joab, are ruthless generals ahead of David's army. Anyway, they find Sheba holed up in a place called Abel Beth Makkah, and they build siege ramps up against the walls. You can imagine walls having sieges built up against them. And then a wise woman, it says, comes out and she peers over the wall and she says, they used to say long ago, verse 16 says, get your answers at Abel, and that settled it. In other words, there's wise people here. And she says, listen, we the peaceful and the faithful in Israel, and you're trying to destroy a city that is the mother of Israel, and you're taking away God's inheritance. Anyway, so Joab and Abishai say, no, we're not doing that. She says, well, I'll tell you what do you want? So they said, we want this guy Sheba. So she says, we'll give him his head. We'll chuck his head over the wall of the city, which is what they do. And I suppose Joab and Abishai catch the head of, Sheba, the rebel. The armies disperse. And you're thinking, what is that in the Bible for? Well, I suppose if we're looking at the pictures of it, that woman in that city, she was faced against insurmountable odds. I mean, the two of the most violent men in Israel building ramps against her, and yet she believed God would give her wisdom to handle it. And the wisdom was this: when there is a cancer among you, you want to cut it out. I think for my life, a devotional look at that, I would say, if I'm hanging around with people that are going to cause me destruction and are going to cause me trouble, I want to cut them out of my life. If I've got habits that are creeping in that are going to cause me to lose my inheritance, I want to cut them out of my life. So just like she cut Sheba out of the community, I think that we encourage to do similar things with the things that threaten our inheritance and our future. Anyway, 2 Samuel 21, David is confronted with a famine for 3 years, and he asks the Lord, why this famine? And God says, well, you're being judged because you were supposed to honor the covenant that you made with the Gibeonites. Remember, that was a dishonorable covenant. The Gibeonites came and pretended to be far away from a faraway clan, but meanwhile they were their neighbors. And Saul didn't like them, so Saul tried to annihilate them. And God says, it's not right. You can't be covenant breakers. Because why? Because God is a covenant-keeping God. And even if you make a wrong covenant or an ill-advised covenant, God expects you to keep it. So, for example, I've counseled people who maybe committed adultery, caused their marriage to break up, and then married each other, and think, we've got the seeds of deception in our marriage. How can God bless it? Listen, God blesses even ill-advised covenants, because covenants are made before God, and they're supposed to be honored. Anyway, so David, to rectify the situation, goes to the Gibeonites and says, how can I honor you? They say, give us some descendants of Saul. So David does that. He goes to the concubines. Saul's girlfriends, and he finds some descendants of Saul and hands them over to the Gibeonites, and the Gibeonites kill them. I think we need to spare a moment and think about the plight of these concubines. It's a terrible situation. Anyway, Rizpah, one of them, finds her dead son and the rest of these guys, and she stays there valiantly day and night, keeping wild beasts away from their bones. When David hears about it, he says, oh, she's a noble woman. So he gets Saul's bones, Jonathan's bones, and the bones of these descendants of the concubines, and he buries them in Saul's father's tomb, in Kish's tomb. And the chapter ends with some more battles against the Philistines. But as we draw this to a close, as we peer over the balcony, as it were, over the walls of that wise woman's city, I think God would have us peer over the walls of our lives and say, Lord, what do you want us to remove, to cut out, to do away with, that we can live in your inheritance?